Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the very first Bow Valley Naturalist talk in Canmore. Thanks to all the people in Banff who came, or most likely they're all just sitting on their computers on YouTube, because why would they come to Canmore? But just a show of hands, does anyone in this room not know Bow Valley Naturalists? Did we get any brand new people? Okay, great. Well, this is a really special night, and once per year for the next 3 years, well, and in 5 years total, through a generous grant provided by Bob and Mary Smith, a memorial grant through the Luxton Historical Foundation, we get to have one special guest lecturer. And Bob and Mary Smith were Bow Valley Naturalists right from the early days, and they were really involved in protecting the Amnuska natural area. And Bob, right up to in his 90s, was doing talks for the Seniors Lodge where he stayed. And so it's, thanks to them that we're here tonight. Before I introduce Andrew, we have the great honor of having Tobias Years from the Stoney Nakoda, who's going to do a land acknowledgement for us and a little prayer to start the evening. So welcome, Tobias.
Hello, amba tits minisni wadan idan wahitsono. Owaste wahino chuwapjan kudebi nitsi tanindus ina wagyamge king kushin niska doha oda omangyagin nitsi yameye higabine. Owaste tsa iyahinitsi wahine insnesi chigyabits. In my language, I was saying thank you to be here, this beautiful mountain area, Chuapjang Kudebi, Canmore. My grandma would tell me all these stories about coming to Canmore and the medicines, the animals, and awesome stories like, for example, Dead Man Flats. On the way coming here, how it was named that was Dead Man's Flats. One of our relatives was out hunting, and he pretended to be a dead person by the pond because he wasn't supposed to be hunting in the area. So, and they go back to see if he was still there, and he ran back home, and so it was named Dead Man's Flats. So hearing all these stories, it's always great, and it's an honor to be here in the mountains area. And in my language, I'll pray. Waktiabi wang shigune wakam marbiakta hai snes amba yakubine waste ne chi hibine nieton chijibadots ne chigimankyabne anchaji think sta yabicha gisnimicha chingabits bare ne pingshabi togadam yabicha hechin anchaji thinks wakan chingshiwajin chaje wasteze. Thank you. Okay.
So Andrew Nikiforuk first spoke for the Bow Valley Naturalists back in 2012 when he wrote his book, Empire of the Beetle. And I think maybe I organized that talk, but geez, that would be a long time ago. That would mean I've been doing this along with others for a long time. But Andrew's been writing for over 3 decades now about energy economics in the West for all kinds of magazines. And he is now a contributing editor with Canada's best independent newspaper, the Tyee. And he's written all these books and hasn't been afraid to tackle really hard issues. And, I think tonight could be a tough night, but I'm so pleased to see so many people here that are willing to face these tough issues and tough challenges. And without further ado, I invite Andrew to come forward.
Well, thank you very much, Leanne. It's a great honor to be invited here, and I thank you. I thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you, Tobias, for your prayer. We're going to need more prayers, I think. So let me just start with plunge in here with a few of the messages I hope I will communicate tonight. The first is normal is dead, long dead. Liberalism is failing, and the age of discord has begun and will probably last for several decades. So we are all living in a period of great historical disruption. At this time, we have two narratives about the future. One is business as usual. Let's just keep on using those fossil fuels and doing the same damn things we're doing. Or let's support a green transition and spend all of our money on windmills and solar farms and electric cars. And the problem with both these narratives is that they are extremely reductive and they don't really reflect the reality of the situation. And they also leave out other possibilities. And I'll be talking about some of those narratives tonight, whether it's degrowth or collapse. Those are other possibilities for us. So I'm going to try and give you what I think is a more realistic picture. And without realism, hope has no reality. Climate change is a problem, but it is really basically a symptom of overshoot. And by overshoot, I'm talking about too many people consuming too much energy and too many things, and drawing down on all of the planet's ecosystems at the same time. Switching from one energy source to another won't really prevent the Titanic from hitting a bunch of icebergs. So electrifying the Titanic at this point in time, great idea, good plan, but it's probably not the right direction to go. The other thing I want to say is that we've used fossil fuels to construct an offshoot of the biosphere. And there's an engineer by the name of Peter Half. He calls it the technosphere. That's a great name for it, actually. And it's really an autonomous system that consumes energy and excretes waste in many forms. One of them is CO2. Another is plastic. Another is nitrogen. And because more and more of us live in the technosphere, we no longer live in the old world, the biosphere, the planet, the local places that where we were born and came from. We consider technology to be the God. And so whenever we encounter a problem, the solution will always be another fucking technology, right? Okay, we'll get an app for this, don't worry, right? Okay. Technology is a symbol of energy intensity. It's a reflection of actually how much energy a civilization has in his spending. It creates more problems than it solves. It pursues dead ends. And basically, technology really is a way of giving people power who have absolutely no wisdom whatsoever. No, please. Just so the green transition, in many ways, one of its failings, and I'll get into it in my presentation, is it's a top-down, large-scale project that will intensify the mining of the biosphere. In other words, it is part and parcel of the technosphere in the sense that it is actually expanding the scope and scale of the technosphere under the illusion that somehow it's going to deal with the carbon problem. So then, lastly, we're left with some questions. Can we slow down? Can we embrace degrowth? Can we beat, as James Lovelock said marvelously, can we beat a sustainable retreat using less energy? Will the technosphere allow these other options? Or are we already in the throes of a collapse? Which, of course, always leads to some kind of renewal. And then lastly, and we'll come to this in the talk, there's a very well-known psychiatrist by the name of Ian McGilchrist, who's a wonderful man, who has some really interesting things to say about what's happening to our brains at this point in time as we live more and more in artificial environments. And then we'll, yeah. All right, let's begin. Well, let's begin again. If this was working just fine. There we go. All right. So, one of my favorite writers of all time is Kurt Vonnegut, and who got how absurd civilization was becoming before the rest of us really got it, right? And Kurt loved jokes, and so this is the only joke I'll probably tell tonight. And he liked all kinds of corny jokes, and this is a bit of a corny joke too. So he said, he'd always say, this is a bad news, good news joke. So here's the bad news. And the bad news is that the Martians have landed in New York and they've taken over the Waldorf Astoria. The good news is that they eat homeless people and pee gasoline and poop uranium. So, Kurt, you got to appreciate Kurt. All right. We really do live in the age of the absurd, and so much of what I'm going to be talking about tonight will illustrate the absurdity of our political situation, our economic situation, our energy situation, the whole 9 yards. So I talked about the two narratives. We've got the business as usual, that's Daniel Smith and company, and then we've got a Green New Deal, where, let's replace all these fossil fuels, and usually let's replace 100% of them, and let's work towards zero emissions. We've even invented a new vocabulary, net zero, and neither one of these narratives is reflecting reality. So let's get right into it. Now, Simon Michaud is a geologist, and I also think he's an engineer. He worked in the Australian mining industry for 20 years. He's now one of the head researchers at the Geological Survey of Finland. And he's put out a number of reports in the last 2 or 3 years that have questioned whether the green transition actually has the materials, the money, and the time to make a dent in the problem. So one of his reports came out, and this was the major conclusion. He looked at all the minerals needed for windmills, for batteries, for solar panels, and he found, there just is not enough on the planet to get this job done. And of course, the problem with renewables, they're not really renewables, they have to be rebuilt every 25 years, is their high mineral intensity in their construction. They all require critical minerals or rare earth minerals of one kind or another. It's the dark underbelly of the green transition. We thought, okay, we're going to get away from fossil fuels and enter this green world, which I think many people imagined it to be the product of immaculate conception, and forgot that, there's some materials that have to be dug up and mined and refined to build all of this stuff. So here's a good example. We've used 700 million tons of copper throughout history. We're going to need 700 million tons over the next 22 years. That's not even counting the green transition. You add the green transition, we need 4.7 billion tons of copper alone. right? We really don't have that amount of copper, and what we do have is declining in ore value. All right, anybody here know what the ore value of copper is today? 60, 50, 40, 30, how about 0.67? That means you have to crush a hell of a lot of rock before you get any copper. Here's another way to look at battery metals needed to phase out fossil fuels and global reserves. And you can see that we're in trouble with nickel, we're in trouble with graphite, in trouble with lithium, cobalt, and on it goes. Sure. Now, these slides are pretty dense. You can listen to Michaud's presentations, and they're excellent. They're really worth listening to. So then he did another calculation. How much electricity are we going to need to power the green transition? So, you know, we're looking at total electrical power at the moment in 2018 was 26,000 terawatts. And what we need for the green transition is like 37,000 terawatts. And then he says, you know, look, we wish to construct an electrical system much larger than the existing power grid using energy that is more expensive and not as effective as what we have now. In other words, the power density is very different. So you need more solar panels, more windmills, and then more storage batteries to make up for the difference. All right, then he did another set of calculations. All right, so if you need 37,000 terawatts, how many non-fossil fuel power stations does that mean? That's 607,000 compared to what we have now in fossil fuels around the planet, 46,000. So, I mean, this is massive. I mean, what you know, people talk about the green transition. I say, what transition hasn't even started yet, right? And then there was kickback, and there was a number of people said, no, Michaud, we've got enough minerals to do this. Don't worry about it. We're going to be able to do this. And not only that, we're not going to have to replace everything. And so there's this guy in Silicon Valley by the name of Tony Seba. And Tony Seba calls himself a thought leader. I think everybody in Silicon Valley calls themselves that. And he says, you know, people were citing his work and said, well, you know, Michaud has got it all wrong because we won't have to replace 1.4 billion passenger vehicles. We'll only have to replace a fraction of that, and they'll all be autonomous vehicles, and we'll just buzz around in this happy world of autonomous vehicles. And then, and this is called, we're going to, you know, change the whole model for transportation, and transportation will become just a service, and you get on your phone and order a vehicle, come to your door, whisk you off to some place, and not only that, hey, you won't even have to fucking drive the thing. You know, you just sit there and stare at a screen, and what a marvelous experience you will have. Anyway, saying we're going to drop, you know, the number of vehicles from 247 million to 44 million in 2030. I mean, this is nonsensical, pie in the sky kind of Silicon Valley approach to things. Oops, what happened here? Okay, so then Michaud went back and he did some more calculations. And this time he looked at the battery storage requirements needed for wind and for solar. And then he looked at, so there's a 6-hour buffer, a 48-hour buffer, a 28-day buffer, and a 12-week buffer. What we probably really need is a 12-week buffer to make this system work if you want some energy security in it. And then he looked at, okay, let's look at all of the the minerals we need for this. And as you can see, the black, that's current metal production today in the world. So to construct batteries with 6 hours, 48 hours, 28 days, 12 weeks, puts us into an entire realm. What we're talking about is just a massive, highly intensive mining boom right across the world. And much of it, of course, in Aboriginal territory. Nothing new there. And then some of the critics said, well, you know what, Michaud, you've got your calculations wrong. We won't need all that storage power because we will use pumped hydro stations. You guys know what that is, where you take a body of water and you pump it up to the top of the hill and you let it flow down, and it will catch a turbine and make some electricity for you. And so here's current global freshwater withdrawal. This is what we're going to need for those extra battery storage times. In other words, you will have intense competition for water throughout the world. Are we going to drink water, or are we going to use it for battery storage uses, right? So here are some of his conclusions. I'm going to go through them real briefly. The green transition is not feasible. The needed power storage buffer to manage intermittent supply from wind and solar systems has been overlooked and is a blind spot. What energy system we use to phase out fossil fuels has yet to be determined. Restructuring society will be needed in any scenario going forward as a consequence of having a different energy generation system. No kidding. And Michaud has more and some really, really interesting ideas. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. So we've got a problem. But the problem gets bigger when we start thinking about other aspects and shades to it. So here's something we never talk about anymore. We don't talk about population. And we don't talk about population and its relationship to resources, resource scarcity, and what, what our population is doing to the planet. Population is part of the problem. And here you can see how population works together with the other parts. You see steady energy consumption this is a chart going back to the 1980s. You see rising carbon emissions with that energy consumption, and you see rising population growth at the same time, and you see GDP. This is a slide from Art Berman, who's a really incredible oil analyst in Houston. Carbon emissions and overshoot of planetary boundaries are unlikely to decrease as long as energy consumption, world GDP, and population continue to increase. In other words, we have to shrink all three of those things over time if we want to address the problem. So far, we're having real difficulty addressing one part of the problem, which is CO2 emissions, right? Now, this is the problem with people, we consume a lot of crap. So back in 1900, this is from a slide from Vaclav Smil, who's a great energy ecologist. Per capita extraction was, close to 1 ton per person. And that's when the population was 1.6 billion. Now, per capita extraction is in excess of 3 tons per person with a global, well, the population, of course, is now 8 billion. But that was in 2010. So that's, as long as we are spending energy, we're spending energy to extract minerals to construct a different world. And that world is really the technosphere. Now, another aspect of this world we never talk about is the fact that, all right, there's just not 8 billion of us on the planet, but we all have energy slaves working for us. And when you start to calculate the value of energy in a barrel of oil, what that translates into is 500 billion energy slaves, whether we're talking about lawn blowers or ATVs or chainsaws or power equipment of one kind, vacuum cleaners, you know, dishwashers, boom, boom, boom. And every time the population increases, more and more people are demanding more and more energy slaves. Now, Albert Bartlett, God bless him, he's long dead. He was a physicist down in Boulder, Colorado. Can you think of any problem on any scale from microscopic to global whose long-term solution is in any demonstrable way aided, assisted, or advanced by having larger populations at the local level, the state level, the national level, or globally? I mean, this is a big question that you guys have just faced here in this community, knowing that if you double the population of Canmore, I mean, that's the end of wildlife corridors here, right? You've kind of reached your limit, but we don't like to accept limits on our activities. So what time is it? All right, let's go back to a little history. So Peter Turchin is an historian, and one of the reasons I like him is because he used to be a bark beetle guy. So this is a guy who started his life studying bark beetles and their population dynamics, which are very much like humans. You're going to bust and boom, right? And he thought, okay, I'm going to start looking at patterns in history and put together a big database. So he's a big data guy. He works with big data. And he's been at this now for about 20 years, and he's come up with some interesting conclusions, and he attracted a lot of attention in 2014 when he said, okay, folks, the 2020s are going to be a period of high political violence in North America and probably the rest of the world for these reasons. And he turned out to be absolutely right. Now, I mean, we think of the horsemen of the apocalypse as being mass migration, epidemic disease, state failure, famine, and also always inevitably some kind of climate change, whether it's natural or whether, or in our case, we know it ain't natural anymore. So he looks at history this way, and this is not a popular way to look at history. I mean, history at the moment is supposed to be linear, where everything is going to get better, where, you know, we're happy, progressive people, we're always innovating, and we don't have to worry about history. Whereas Turchin says that's not how history works. It goes in cycles. Any traditional people on the planet always looks upon life as a cycle. There's no friggin' way it's just a straight line, you know, like, give me a fucking break. I mean, life is not that way. We all know in our own lives, our lives are cycles. You know, we born, we live, hopefully we live marvelously well, we marry, we have children, and we grow old, and then we die. And civilizations follow the same cycle. They rise and they fall. And there are periods of integration and periods of disintegration. And Turchin would argue we are in a period of disintegration. All right, we've gone to the top here, and now we're cruising down. And not only that, but none of our leaders or our elites can recognize this or even talk about this fact. Ordinary people know that bad things are happening. They feel it every day. But our leaders do not. So this is what lemmings believe. And honest to God, it's very much really how humans behave. So what are the key factors in bringing a civilization to a disintegrating phase? The first one is elite overproduction. So Peter Turchin says you got too many elites, and then they get quarrelsome, and they get competitive, and they get violent, and there's no consensus among your leaders. All right. A good way to describe elite overproduction would be, imagine I had set up a bunch of chairs here for musical chairs. you know, and then every time the music ends, instead of, I would take away one chair and add another 100 people into the game. Okay? That gives you an idea of what's going on among the 1% and the 10% at the moment. Here's an example of it. So, and a good example of elite overproduction is the number of lawyers as a percentage of the population. Well, I mean, if you're a lawyer, what do you want to do? You want to become a politician, right? Here's another, okay, now, another indicators here. So he talks about, you've got elite overproduction. The other issue is what Turchin calls popular immiseration. All right, so more and more people experiencing the shitty side of life. And he uses this example. It's fascinating, right? So here's the life expectancy of women in the United States, you know, one of the most advanced countries in the world, rapidly declining. And it doesn't take much of an imagination to figure out that Donald Trump's support is coming very much from those areas of the country where the life expectancy for women is in steady decline. And there's reasons for that. I won't, but so that's just one measure of immiseration. Here's another level of immiseration. All right, so this is wages of men without college degree have stagnated since the 1970s. And you wonder why there's so many angry white guys in the United States. And there is. It's poisonous. Here's a more local example of immiseration that's taking place in this province. The life expectancy of Aboriginal people in southern Alberta has, because of the opioid crisis and because of the government's racist response to it, is, I mean, this is horrific. Here's another example. All right, so in popular immiseration, well, you have lots of poor people and you have rich people controlling everything. So here's the richest 10% own 60 to 80% of the wealth around the world, and there's Europe, there's East Asia, North America, Latin America. This is a huge global problem. The top 10% are responsible, by the way, for 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Anyway, there's Turchin, if you want to read about more about Turchin. When the equilibrium between ruling elites and the majority tips too far in favor of elites, political instability is all but inevitable. All right, so that's the historical time that we live in now and in which we are going to have to deal with a whole bunch of issues. All right, and the big issue, of course, is our energy consumption, which just keeps on growing. But this was not always the case. If you look back at history, for most of human history, our population was always below 1 billion. But until we hit fossil fuels, and then we went kaboom. I mean, fossil fuels were the Viagra for the species, really. Now, this economist is Robert Gordon. He's a U.S. economist, pretty smart guy. He said there was virtually no economic growth before 1750, suggesting that the rapid progress made over the past 250 years could well be a unique episode in human history rather than a guarantee of endless future advance at the same rate. Amen. All right. Now here's another thing we don't like talking about, and we don't even have a name for it most of the time. Nate Hagens, who is a really, really interesting fellow. He's got a great podcast called The Great Simplification. I highly recommend it, where he interviews all kinds of people about all of these issues. He doesn't call it the technosphere, he calls it the superorganism. So what have we done with fossil fuels? We've used fossil fuels to construct this enormously artificial civilization composed of glass and steel and concrete and plastic, and all of the energy slaves that serve it, and an endless array of digital equipment and appliances that are increasingly becoming all connected. And then we have a whole crew of people who call themselves techno-optimists, who say, and I kid you not, I mean, this was a stunning thing. Kevin Kelly, who is, again, another one of these Silicon Valley guys, been around for a long time, since the 1960s. We can see more of God in a cell phone than in a tree frog. Well, if you're a naturalist and you care about the natural world, I mean, that will freeze your heart when somebody starts talking like that. And you can see the connectivity that is present in the technosphere with our roads, with our shipping routes, our air networks. And of course, all this connectivity invites dangerous fragility, as COVID reminded us. Here's an example of the technosphere at work. So here's Las Vegas, 1984, a NASA satellite. Look at the dam there. So this is an organism that keeps on growing and growing and growing and respects no limits whatsoever. And the incredible thing is that the technosphere in 2020 weighed more than the entire biomass on the planet. So that's what we've used fossil fuels for the last 150 years, is building almost for ourselves an alternative reality, an alternative universe, an artificial environment for ourselves to live in. I mean, I found this stunning. I thought, holy Christ. So our plastic, our concrete, all that stuff weighs more than all living things on the planet. And here's some more examples. So we've got 4 gigatons of animals left on the planet, but the plastic population, which the techno-optimists will describe as techno-species, is 8 gigatons. Trees and shrubs, 900 gigatons. Buildings and infrastructure, 1,000 gigatons. I always laugh, when you hear people like Daniel Smith or someone else say, we have to balance things out with the environment. I mean, we're crushing the environment. Here's just another illustration. Humans are 390 megatons. What's left of wild terrestrial mammals is only 20 megatons. Domesticated cattle, look at the size of it. I mean, the wild portion of the planet is being clobbered. Another way of looking at it, I mean, 10,000 years ago, we were just 1% of the weight of vertebrate land animals. Now we're 32%. And look what's happened to wild animals, reduced to 1%. Now, Peter Haff, who's an engineer in the United States and has written a lot about the technosphere, says, look, it's of global extent, exhibits large-scale appropriation of mass and energy resources, shows a tendency to co-opt for its own use information produced by the environment, and is autonomous. So one of the reasons we are having so much trouble making any progress at all in reducing emissions is that this entity we don't talk about. It's kind of like, it's such a big thing. It's what someone would call a hyper object. We can't get our heads around it, but we live in it every day. We're dependent upon it. The question is, do we serve it or does it serve us? All right. Let's one of the problems, of course, with the technosphere are its emissions, its pollution, its waste stream, which is extraordinary. I mean, this is all the technosphere does. It takes in energy, metabolizes it, and spews out waste of all kinds, from plastic to CO2. And we don't think about this well enough, but here's something called, and climate scientist James Hansen and others will talk about this, the Earth's energy imbalance. So you're saying, holy Christ, what's that? All right, so, because I asked the same question, I thought, what the hell is this thing, right? All right, we're producing all this CO2, right? That's like putting a blanket over the Earth. And when you do that, all of that energy stays down. Well, it actually gets absorbed mostly in the oceans and partly in the atmosphere. So 80% of all this extra energy is being absorbed in the oceans. So the CO2 is the blanket, and it creates this imbalance whereby, you have energy coming in from the sun, and there should be energy coming out and back out. And we've blocked that. So this is a powerful force that, again, is responsible for what we see in terms of the wildfires and the storms and the floods. So in 2012, the energy imbalance equaled 400,000 atomic bombs exploding every day. Exploding every day. Now, it's 1 million atomic bombs every day. And you wonder why the weather is getting so bad and why the climate is becoming so unsavory. We know, some of the very best scientists are now saying that by the end of this century, 3 to 6 billion people, human beings, will find themselves living most likely in unlivable parts of the planet if we don't address this issue. Now here's the other complicating factor. All right, when civilization has lots of energy, what do you use that energy for? You use that energy to build more complexity. And at the same time, you remove the rungs on the ladder that got you there in the first place. So any old technologies, you reject them, you throw them out, they're gone, dead, and we're just deal with the more complicated stuff that we have. So it is a spiral that you build. And at a certain point, for every civilization, it becomes unmanageable. We can no longer meet the energy demands or the complexity of managing this system. And based on this very fact, Joseph Tainter, who's an anthropologist in the States, said, because of the connection of energy to problem solving, we will not stop using fossil fuels until we are forced to. The other aspect of this technosphere is you have all of these Silicon Valley guys, all of these billionaires like Musk and Bezos, and to them, the future is melding with the machine. They want to meld with the technosphere. They want to leave this planet. They want to connect to a machine. They want to be able to deal with all that data. They don't want to be here anymore. And they call themselves transhumanists. And this is a very, very strong ideology among these people. And they're not quite sure they're going to make it here on planet Earth, and that's why they're making all these plans to move to Mars. Now I want to talk about this guy. He's a French guy. His name is Jacques Ellul. You've probably never heard of him. He lived in rural France. He was part of the resistance in the 40s against the Nazis. He was a scholar, also a lawyer, a jurist, a radical Christian, Protestant Christian. And he wrote the most remarkable book on technology. And it came out in the 1950s. And Ellul is a prophetic voice. He could see what technology was doing to us as it became the dominant force in civilization and in our lives. So this is the book, Technological Society. And here's some of the things he tried to warn us about then. He said, and he referred to it as la technique. So he just wasn't talking about machines, but he was really talking about ways of thinking and organizing and administering things. So it's a totality of methods that dominate all of society. And that's technology today, right? You can't have a conversation without somebody talking about some technology or telling you what to stream or one thing or another. It's penetrated every aspect of our lives. It promotes absolute efficiency. That's what it's all about. It homogenizes every culture, every society it conquers. So a good way to think of technology is it is doing to all of us what Europeans did to North America when they came with the conquest. Penetrates every geography. It has the psychology of a tyrant, right? You know, you're using your phone and you're trying to text somebody, and that fucking autocorrect tells you, you know, it like somehow it thinks it knows what you're thinking, and it doesn't know what I'm thinking. I'm dyslexic and I have lots of problems with spelling, and I'm thinking, dude, you know, buzz off. Let me, you know, anyway. But that's involved in so many applications in everything we do all the time. Replaces the natural with the artificial, all right? So we used to have abundant salmon runs on the West Coast. What did we replace them with? Salmon farms dependent on high inputs of energy and other crap. And all right, so we were taking our forests and now we're replacing them with plantations, artificial plantations with trees that aren't even native to the area in which they're being planted. And on it goes. It's self-augmenting, so it keeps on building itself. And one technology is connected to the next technology, which is connected to the next technology. You know, like this whole friggin' setup we have here. It promotes organized collective irresponsibility. Who's accountable? We no longer know who's accountable. Efficiency replaces truth, beauty, and goodness as the norm. When do you ever hear anyone like Bezos or Musk talk about truth, beauty, or goodness? It's not even in their vocabulary. And so what Ellul warned us about, he said, a technological society will make us so dependent on all of these techniques and technologies that without them, with them, we are like astronauts in space. We cannot move without being dependent on these life-saving essential technologies. No longer are we surrounded by fields, woods, and rivers, but by signs, signals, billboards, screens, labels, and trademarks. This is our universe. All right. And this was a guy writing this in the 1950s, 1960s. He was popular in the United States for a while, but most people dismissed him as, look, Ellul, you're a pessimist. But, you know, screw off. We don't want to listen to you. Now, that brings me to this fellow. This is Ian McGilchrist, and I think I brought his book here. Highly recommend it. It's called The Master and the Emissary. And it will change your way about how you think about things. I promise you that. So he's a very well-known psychiatrist. He lives in the Isle of Skye in a very remote area that's quite wild. He does not like cities. And he has been studying all of the research on the left brain and the right brain for decades and decades. And we have all kinds of misconceptions about the right brain and the left brain. We need them both. They work together, but the right brain is the master and the left brain is the emissary. The left brain must serve the right brain. And the left brain has many wonderful characteristics, but it's reductive. And not only that, it also believes it has all the answers, whereas the right brain is expansive. It's open to possibilities. It's looking at the big picture, while the left brain is always focusing on the little picture. So what's happening? Well, what's happening as our civilization becomes more left hemisphere dominant because of the environments we live in, which is highly technological society, we see skill and judgment replaced by repeatable processes, a loss of the broader picture. We see more fear and paranoia, more anger and aggressiveness, language devoid of richness and meaning. We're speaking more and more like machines. And this is exactly what happens to civilizations when they begin to fail. The left brain thinking takes over and can't even see the big picture. Now, here's an example of the plastic words that have invaded our vocabulary that are absolutely meaningless, but are become the essential language of the technosphere. Basic need, care, sender, system, trend. And these are all Lego words. You can put them all together and make up a sentence. You know, the energy center provided a problem process for the project that reflected a new trend and some welfare values. You know, like, I don't even know what I said. I don't know if it doesn't mean anything, right? It's devoid of meaning. Now, the interesting thing is that we're now, our universe is very much controlled by a bunch of billionaires, many of whom have Asperger's or are autistic, and whose left brain is really calling all the shots. You know, Elon Musk is not a man of empathy. All right, his right brain, I don't even know if it's working. But his left brain should be serving his right brain, and it is not. Okay. So now we've got the bigger picture. Why will renewables not cut it the way we imagine it? The first is that there's no energy transition, no paradigm shift yet to any green revolution, because new energy sources are additive, right? You can look. We're still burning wood. That's down at the bottom. That's biomass, right? We haven't stopped burning wood just because we discovered coal or oil or gas. We keep on using more energy, and we add it on to what we have. And one of the reasons we haven't seen any major decreases in CO2 emissions is because we're using all of that renewable energy to do more things. Artificial intelligence, by the way, alone will take up 3% of the global electricity supply within a decade. And so electric passenger cars are now about 2%. That's not much of a solution yet. And then we have something called Jevons paradox. Jevons was an economist in the 19th century, really quite an interesting guy. He wrote a great book about coal, where he was trying to figure out, well, you know, as steam engines got more efficient, shouldn't we be using less coal? But what he found is as steam engines became more efficient, more industries and more sectors used those steam engines to do other work, and so coal demand went up, did not go down. So he said it's wholly Confucian ideas to suppose that the economic use of fuel, that efficiency, is equivalent to diminished consumption. The very contrary is the truth. And that's what we're learning once again. This is a slide from Nate Hagen's recent presentation he gave, where here you can energy intensity, which is another way to measure efficiency. We're getting much better at using energy, but energy efficiency has increased approximately 36%, but energy consumption has increased 63%. So Jevons paradox at work once again. Then we have geopolitical issues. I mean, the Chinese recognized 30 years ago that rare earth minerals would be the next OPEC or the next oil, and they have planned for this. So they are the leaders in refining almost all rare earth minerals in the world. So if you thought the geopolitics of oil was horrific, and it is, now we've added a whole nother dimension. Then there's the whole issue of increasing complexity, and we'll skip this and just go on. This is an example of this increasing complexity. All right, so you want to heat your home. All right, so let's put an offshore windmill somewhere, and then we'll use that power to crack the hydrogen, and then we've got to put that hydrogen in some very secure storage units, and then we will transport that through a network. Anyway, you get the point that this is this is added complexity. Then, of course, we've got accelerating climate disorder. All the science in the last couple of weeks has said, boy, we've got a runaway train on our hand. Then you have the whole issue of the intense mining boom, which we will see this active in the Rockies and throughout the country. And then we've got another issue here with the technosphere. Remember, it's autonomous. It wants to use more and more energy. All of the techno-optimists say we need more energy, not less. And so here's Peter Haff, and the emergence of new technological subsystems that can capture abundant but previously unavailable or little used renewable resources, like that provided by sunlight, may just as likely be an opening move in the expansion of the technosphere towards massive increases in the use of these new resources. So in other words, the technosphere has its own agenda and wants more energy. We might want to use the renewables to reduce fossil fuel use. The technosphere might be saying, I just need more energy. I don't care where it comes from. And CO2, by the way, is not going to affect the functioning of machines. Might not be good for you guys. And then, with this mining boom, this was a story in the Wall Street Journal. So this is the Ring of Fire, the James Bay lowlands, Aboriginal land. There's $67 billion worth of rare earth minerals needed for battery construction for electric vehicles. It's another tar sands project where you have to ask yourself, what the fuck are we doing? To save the planet, we are going to destroy the planet because we don't want to talk about the growth. We don't want to talk about economic growth as a problem. We don't want to talk about our population on the planet as being an issue, a contributing issue. This is a British philosopher by the name of James Gray. Highly recommend that you read him. Very interesting fellow. So he's very skeptical about the green transition. And he was a good friend of James Lovelock. He understands that climate change is a true threat to civilization. What I'm very skeptical about is net zero. It's a bit like suffering from cancer and using candle therapy. I think conventional climate policy is for therapeutic people to feel good. They don't want to feel powerless, so they deceive themselves. Now, let's bring this down to another level. Look at the car as a metaphor for kind of the problem problems that we have. So there's more than 1 billion vehicles on the planet. Passenger cars are responsible for about 7% of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. So if you got rid of all of the fossil fuel vehicles, you've only gotten rid of a fraction of the problem. So we know what car has done to our urban environments, totally transformed them. We used to have cities that looked like this, that were walkable. And if you've ever been to any of the old Italian towns like Siena or whatever, it's extraordinary. You just have this entirely different feel about the place. It's organic and all built at a human scale. And then we blew that up with the car, which was a technological innovation in its day. It changed our perception of time and place, and how we dealt with people. And then we end up with cities that look like this. So, and then we now hope to somehow have an impact by changing one car for another car. So what are some of the problems here? Well, here's coming back to Uluru. And actually, we'll just skip this one for the moment. Okay, so back to the car. And so here's one of the developments that I find this crazy. So what percentage of electric vehicles in China do you think are SUVs? No one, give it a try. What do you think? 50%. 50% of the electric vehicles in China are now SUVs. And what do we know about SUVs? They are responsible for 3.3 million barrels a day growth in oil demand from passenger cars. So the growth of SUVs by 2040 could cancel out all of the emission saving from 100 million electric cars. We don't want to tell anyone, well, you shouldn't have an SUV, or we shouldn't be building SUVs. So now we've got this huge problem where everyone wants one, automakers make more money building them, and 50% of the electric vehicles in China are SUVs. And I think it's 20% in some other locations, but it's going up and up and up. You can get an electric Hummer even, So we've got a problem with electric vehicles in that they weigh typically 30 to 35% more than conventional vehicles because of the battery. The battery can weigh up to a ton. And the batteries, bigger cars demand bigger batteries. So more SUVs means heavier batteries, more mining, more consumption. Somebody in the industry said, look, if you really cared about CO2, you'd reduce car size and weight. We're going the opposite direction. We're increasing car size and weight. And then, of course, the ultimate here is that cars will become the next platform for disrupting society, something called auto evolution. Of course, you've got all the promises, all the technological bullshit will reduce accidents, traffic emissions, free us up to do something else instead of driving during the commute. God forbid that you pay attention to what you're actually doing. And what do we know? When people can use a car without having to operate it, they increase their car travel. Oh, so what problem have we solved here now? So autonomous vehicles actually will be discouraging people from doing what we want them to do, which is to walk. Of course, we don't want that. So, and it's a total distraction from the real problem. We need to make our cities small and walkable again. Instead, we're chasing electric SUVs. And of course, I mean, if we really wanted to subsidize something useful, why not subsidize bicycles? Why are we only subsidizing, electric vehicles, primarily for rich people to drive? All right, so now we're coming to the end. Civilizations do collapse. We don't like to talk about that, but they do. And so here's the kind of predicament we're in. And because you're Bow Valley naturalists, I thought, okay, let's look at it from the way a naturalist or polar bear might. All right, so here you are, you're digging into a ringed seal. You're dependent on eating those seals, 43 of them a year, because they're just full of megajoules of energy. And 121-pound seal is equivalent to 3,000 metajoules. So imagine eating 3,700 Cliff Bars all at once, and just think of the energy you would get from it, right? That's what it. So this is, for a polar bear, a ringed seal is what oil has been to our civilization. All right, so we're removing the ice with climate change, with the result that bears have to swim more and are expending too much energy and cannot get enough food to eat. So a polar bear would need to consume approximately 1.5 caribou, 37 Arctic chars, 74 snow geese, 216 snow goose eggs, or 3 million crowberries to equal the digestible energy available in the blubber of one adult ringed seal. So you see what's happening to polar bears as when there's an energy descent, they have to work harder for less, and that affects their metabolism and their lifespans and their size. So that's the question, was that going to happen to us? Because we've had this treasure trove of fossil fuels and we've been gorging on it, and these fossil fuels are becoming more extreme, and the renewables don't offer the same quality of energy. And nobody wants to talk about, well, hey, there's a solution. Why don't we just use less? Okay, there is a solution. So you change the whole metabolism of a society when you change the energy return on investment. So if the energy returns are high, like a polar bear on ice hunting seals, you just wait for it to pop up, boom, in it goes. Thank you very much. To no ice, I have to swim around now and look for a seal, and I might not find one. That's what we might be approaching here. Now, so what happens when a civilization has to deal with energy descent, less energy? The growth of centralized government will stop and wither. Moreover, the energy descent will unleash endemic conflict. Those whose greatest advantage is in the marketplace will struggle to protect it. Cotterill was a US sociologist. So we know what collapse is, again, all about. These are all the symptoms that will help or send a civilization on its way out, which are very similar in many ways to what happens when a marriage collapses and fails. Right? You've got criticism, you've got contempt, you've got defensiveness, you've got stonewalling, and isn't that the way our elites are behaving at the moment? So we're back to the cycle. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall. The integration phase of a civilization is great. It's full of possibilities. There's consensus among elites. And then in the next phase, you get into art and philosophy, and it's kind of you're building on all of your initial triumphs. And then the third phase is decadence, where everyone is talking about, rights, and nobody's talking about responsibilities, and nobody will talk about sacrificing for the greater good. So Peter Turchin again says these are the things you see in collapsing societies. Loss of asabaya, okay, that is a great Arabic word for consensus, for people working things out. Overproduction of elites. Just look at the number of lawyers we have. Immiseration of the people. High levels of political violence, which we are now seeing on a regular basis. Massive wealth inequalities, which we refuse to address. Democracies cannot tolerate these wealth inequalities without failing. And the reason democracies are failing is because the 10% control all of the political parties. Declining fiscal health of the state. Well, you can see that in various parts of the world, like the UK. So the thing about collapse is that you don't know what's going to start it, how it's going to... the failure of a minor element started a chain reaction that reverberated on a greater and greater scale until finally the whole structure was brought to collapse. The Mayans, probably a mega drought. Then you have state failure, the elites go fishing, the economy withers, the people migrate away from the urban centers. In fact, they just walk away. And then we've got the Titanic effect. So who suffers when there's a collapse, when there's a trauma? Well, first class casualties on the Titanic were 39% from first class. Second class, 58%. Steerage, 76%. Same old story here. Now, these are some of our possibilities if we don't get our act together. This is a slide from David Holmgren, who's a permaculture advocate in Australia. And, here we are. We're at the top here. We've got some people thinking we're going to keep on growing. We've got some people thinking that we can stabilize all this with renewables. We've got other people saying, well, we might have a creative descent if we want to manage it, or we can just crash. Now here's a French guy by the name of Biwix, and he wrote a very interesting book about, okay, what would happen if we solved our problems with low-tech thinking? And what if we started by questioning need? And what if we designed for durability and repair? Everything that was sold has to be repairable. What if we relocalized our economies and get off all this globalization stuff? What if we focus the economy on lowering resource use? What if we de-automate services? What if you went to a bank and you actually talked to a teller? What if you went to a grocery store and actually had somebody serve you as opposed to dealing with the kind of autocorrect machines that are telling you what they want? Why can't we use all kinds of different low-tech ways of doing things? Why can't we praise modesty? And he puts it this way: there is no product or service more ecologically sound, resource efficient, or recyclable than the one we do not use. My parents would have appreciated that. They grew up during the Depression. They understood that. What would Václav Smil say about our future? Well, he would say, let's go back to the 50s. Let's reduce our energy consumption by around 40%. And go back to the 50s, life was not bad. It was actually pretty good. And then he would say, all right, let's reduce our energy consumption down to at least 7 barrels. And then he would say, these are the things we know about high energy spending. Does not guarantee prosperity, does not deliver quality, does not ensure security, does not enrich culture, does not promote stability, does not increase diversity, does not guarantee anything except greater environmental burdens. So there is a solution here. So, Are you a rake person? Or are you, you know? Shrinking fossil fuel infrastructure, we should have started this a long time ago. We should have, look, we've blown it. We've exceeded all kinds of limits. We have to restrain ourselves. Let's start pulling up some highways. But we won't do that. BWICS again. Like it or not, there only remains the very rational option to apply the brakes, reduce as quickly and as drastically as possible the average consumption of resources per person. The choice is not between growth and degrowth, but between imposed degrowth, which could be horrendous, because the resource issue will catch up with us in due course, or elective degrowth. So we all need to go on some kind of energy diet. So if you get rid of an appliance, get rid of something, reduce the number of cars you have. We've used fossil fuels to concentrate on quantity. With less energy, we should focus again on quality. We need to slow down. We're out of control. We're totally distracted. We're not paying attention. Ian McGilchrist, one of the things he says too is, and he thinks this is really important, is, you know, embrace silence, slow down, get off social media. Okay, let's just stop there. So we have options. There are other possibilities. There are other paths. We are not talking about them because we do not want to question the dominance of economic growth in our system. We can't imagine a life without the Ponzi scheme of growth, which is, you know, energy plus money plus more people plus more stuff, and it keeps on going and going and going. We also don't want to acknowledge the fact that we have lost control, that we are truly now living in a technosphere that is growing more and more autonomous by day. And we think now that we have created so many problems that the only solution is to get artificial intelligence to solve them for us. Now, how responsible is that? I mean, what are we thinking? So, let me just, C.S. Lewis had a very poignant way of looking at things. He said, you know, if you're looking for comfort instead of truth, you will just get despair in the end. But if you are looking for truth, you will come to a much better place. And so the things that I've said tonight is be prepared for a different future than the ones our elites are telling us we will have. And there's so many different ways, really important ways of doing that, you know. Make sure your family is in good order and good shape. Make sure you know your neighbors. Make sure you're part of your community. Make sure that if you have the time and the inclination to participate in political reform of one kind or another, like John Gray would say, the most important thing he thinks we can do, he doesn't think we can save liberal civilization at this point, but we might be able to address some issues if we had proportional representation and we had different political parties and different people bringing in different ideas. And we desperately need that. So anyway, thank you. I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Andrew's willing to take just a couple of questions. He's has 3 dogs he's traveling with that collectively are about 300 years old, and he has to get to them. But he will take a couple of questions, and I've got a mic here. So.
Hi, I'm Tana Stratton. I've worked banging my head up against these issues my entire career, but I don't want to talk about that. But I want to maybe ask you, who do you talk to? I look around, I may be the youngest person in this room. Like, where are the young people? Why aren't they need to hear this. Danielle Smith and her followers need to hear this. I think there was recently a Renewable Energies Convention in Calgary that she was a keynote speaker to. It was in the media because she had a confrontation with a solar power engineer from Toronto. And some of the messages play to her story that, the transition's not possible, et cetera, but her solution is that's why we just need to continue down the business as usual path. I mean, I'm just curious who else you speak to and what kind of momentum that's getting.
Well, I don't do a lot of public speaking anymore. And this talk is, I haven't given this talk before. It's very much a talk in progress, right? So, and really all I want to do is say, look, there are other narratives, there are other ideas out there, there are other ways of looking at the predicament we are in. And, and nobody has all the answers. I mean, it's just too complex. But certain roads and certain pathways will lead to dead ends. And what I'm afraid of is that the environmental movement, within 5 years, people are going to laugh at it and say, you guys were a bunch of techno-optimists that promised us everything, and you have not delivered the goods, right? And, I'm always amazed, whenever I even hear the word clean tech, I just cringe, all right? There's no such thing as clean tech, right? It's not clean, it's mineral intensive technology, and that has all kinds of side effects. And we need to acknowledge that. There's no fantasy ending here. There's no fairy tale ending. We're in a serious bind, and but we need all kinds of thinkers on deck. People like Simon Michaud, who thinks that all right, we need to get our priorities together here. We need to what minerals do we need? Which minerals do we not need? What ecological systems shall we not rape? And on and on and on it goes, right? So, but we're not there. We're not even having those conversations. So, spread the word. Start the conversation.
And for those who are interested, on December 6th, the Resiliency Institute is hosting a Zoom talk with Richard Heisenberg. So I have that right? Heinberg, sorry.
Heinberg, yep.
And they also have some funding and some ability to survey people who are at that talk and then actually have some workshops and do some follow-up. So although we're not planning as Bow Valley Naturalists to do that, there is this other organization who is. So I encourage you to participate in that conversation on December 6th, and from there's actually going to be some community work being done.
Richard Heinberg he's a very interesting guy, and resilience.org. Resilience, unfortunately, is one of those words that is now just meaningless because everyone uses it, and but they have a lot of interesting stuff on their website.
One more question here from the front.
Yeah, I'm extremely grateful to you. If you have any comments, I was at the UN Earth Summit in 92, and population explosion was like the root of it all. because it multiplies everything. And I knew I went as an independent citizen, and I knew to carry with me the question, can technology solve humanity's ails? And I came home knowing, no, it's an inside job, it's a spiritual crisis. It's our disconnect from the earth, from each other, from ourselves. And in my view, so your comments, we need to look deeply inside ourselves, and we need to get a few verbs straight, because we call wants needs.
Yeah.
And we say I can't when we really mean I won't.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a behavioral crisis and a spiritual crisis. I agree with you 100%. Well spoken.
Okay, well, let's have one more warm Bow Valley thank you for Andrew.
Great pleasure to be here tonight. And what a fantastic venue you guys have here. So.